Good.
Greetings, BAIO family, Save the State, and members from around the globe. My name is Jabari Lamb, and we have another special edition of the Liberian Presidents. Last week, we talked about William David Coleman. This time around, we are talking on the History Channel about Garrison Walter Gibson. And it's important that we say Garrison Walter Gibson, the 14th president of Liberia. I have three special guests that are going to be assisting me with the presentation. We have Zomope, also known as Lovely. We have Paul, Truss, and
Mm.
Zota. So introduce yourselves briefly before we get into it.
Good evening, everyone. Once again, I'm happy to be here. I'm Lovely Somopetiawo, facilitator of the Nigeria Leadership Academy. I want to say Happy New Year. We know it's been a while since last year, though, but I'm happy to
Mhm.
be here again.
Yes. Good evening. Salutations to my Black brothers and sisters from all over the world watching us today. My name is Paul Trussaley. I'm a youth facilitator for the Liberian Leadership Academy. And Happy New Year. It's great to be back again.
Good evening, Ino Sota Wanta, student of the Liberian Leadership Academy. It's good to be back. Happy New Year to everyone.
Indeed, it is great to start a new year, 2025. We are a quarter of a century into the 21st century. Wow, it's been a long time, man. Man. Uh, but we're going to have a great year. And we're going to start it off with learning about the Reverend Garretson Walter Gibson. May the 20th, 1832 to April 26, 1910 was his lifespan. And he was our 14th president from December 11th to December 11th, 1900 to January 4th, 1904. Now, why is it important that we say Garrison Walter Gibson? Why?
Mm-hmm.
O- Okay,
Yeah.
so when you go through so many records, and there was actually confusion when it comes to the middle name of President Garrison Walter Gibson. So there were too many uh, uh, like different entities or different newspaper or publication referring to that debut in their own way. Probably the way they understood the name, or it could be an assumption, or probably it is also not President Garrison or Walter Gibson. So as we go further, we're going to be discussing the Vera publication that published his names and how they published it. So, and then the reason we decided to also accept to use the Walter Gibson is also going soon is going to be explained, because if we go back to the time period in which people were referring to him with different names, we were actually looking at the time period, and the Walter Gibson we also look at the time period of the Walter Gibson, and we felt like I think this is the right way, because at that time he was also working in that particular entity or church that was referring to him as Walter. He was also working in that particular church. So we assume, and we I think it's, for me, I see as a confirmation that if my name is being mispronounced or misspelled by a certain group of people, I think it's because they don't know me well. But if I'm working in an entity and that particular entity uh, spell my name out, that means that name is my name because I was once working in that particular entity. So reason we are using the water. So as we go further, you're going to see how it's going to be like and why we are using the water Gibson.
Yeah, so the reason why we have the name Walter is there's been a lot of misnomers, correct, Lovely, about his name. People have often put, as you see right here, this is from Liberia Today, 1952. the United States Liberian Embassy in Washington, and they have for their President of Liberia series, they have Garretson Warner Gibson. Now, this is not the first time that the name is going to show up. We see in the next
Yes.
one, we have the second one
Yes,
that will refer to him on
yes,
this
yeah, yeah.
stamp.
And one of the things we should be taking into consideration the year this publication came out with these names, the middle name, right? So if
Mhm.
you go back to the first slide, yes, if you go back to the first slide, you will see that particular name was published 1952. As we go further, the year going to change, so we don't know where they were taking these sources from.
Indeed, this is 1952. It was Liberia Today. This is also during the Cold War, and it was more of a U.S. Liberia Today is an interesting publication to say the least. So they're not, I would say, reliable. You probably take some things with a grain of salt. I mean, they do have some information, but could be better. And so here you have the stamps, which, as Lovely mentioned, were taken during the 20th century, probably the mid 20th century. And you see here on this postage stamp, it says Garretson Wilmot Gibson. So we went from Garretson Warner Gibson to now Garretson Wilmot Gibson. And as you see from this source, Frederick Starr, 1913, Liberia Description, History, Problems, United States. You see again right here, says Garretson Warner Gibson. So we have on two different occasions, Garretson Warner Gibson. And it's important that we mentioned the time frame. The first two are in the mid 20th century. Now this one is in the earlier 20th century. And this one happened in 1913, so this was after Gibson's death. So
Yeah. Can I come in?
yep, sure, go
Yes.
ahead.
Yeah, kindly go back to the first slide with the name Warner so that we can give the audience a little bit of context. Yeah, the other one back. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, the second one. So, yeah, like as my colleague Zumapez said, there's been inaccuracies or discrepancies involving Garretson Walter Gibson's middle name Walter. In other sources, they either refer to him as Warner and Wilmot. So this is a source from Liberia Today, which was a news publishing body by the Liberian Embassy in Washington, D.C., published in 1952. It was based on their presentation of the Presidential Stamp Collection series created by Franklin R. Burns, who worked for the Smithsonian Museum Institute in the United States of America. He was commissioned by the Liberian government to do these stamps during the Tubman administration. And here we see that he has made Gibson, like other former presidents that we discussed, he made Gibson to look like he's half white or mulatto. And on the upper left, we see that his middle name is displayed as Warner in the Liberian Today's news publishing piece. If you go to the next slide with the stamp, can you just go to the next slide? On the stamp series, you see the same. On the stamp series, you'll see the same thing, but not with Warner, but the inaccuracy: Garretson Wilmot Gibson. On the stamp series, it's displayed as Wilmot. So these were the inaccuracies. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, this is a publication. This is basically a book written by Frederick Starr, who many people in Liberia's history today always cite. He called Gibson Warner in his book called Liberia Description History Problems that was published in 1913. And if we look at another publication, if you can go to the next slide. And yeah, this is Wikipedia. They do the same thing too. But let's go to the third slide. Yeah, so here we have another author person by the name of Wula T, who writes a book on Gibson, but this book is basically based on Frederick Starr's book. In this book, he refers to Gibson's middle name as Wilmot, and most of what he's work is basically cited from Frederick Starr's book. And in addition to this, you have other discrepancies that follow along with contradictions on his name. But the oldest discrepancy on inaccuracy that we can find goes back all the way to the 1890s, where the African Repository calls him Garretson Wilmot Gibson. If we can go to the next slide. The one with the African Repository
So what we
source.
have is you
Yeah.
see you have a list of them referring to him as either Garrison Warner or Garrison Wilmot. Here you have this
Yeah.
source from Back to Africa, a Liberian Tragedy from the United States. That was written in 2009. Again, most of these are written after Garrison Walter Gibson has died, and they are spreading misinformation. You see,
Yeah.
Wubab was one of the well-known, as we talked about earlier, Frederick Starr, who's a notorious white supremacist. We see this on Wikipedia. We see this even in some of the great books that Liberian historians have done a great job on, such as the Historical Dictionary of Liberia. Gives a lot of accurate information. I mean, names of people that you would never even know about in Liberian history had it not been for the Historical Dictionary of Liberia. And even in here, it makes reference to Garrison Wilmot Gibson and not Garrison Walter Gibson. So this has sort of been ingrained into the Liberian narrative, even from well-known and well-respected historians that have done great work, that they refer to him as either Wilmot or Garrison Warner Gibson, and not his actual name that we know based on the early primary sources.
Yes. And yeah, this is the
African
right hand. So yeah, so in 1877, you also have, in addition, and along with the African Repository, the Episcopal Church, they also called him Warner, and the African Repository republished it. So the African Repository got that misinformation from the Episcopal Church in 1877, and then they republished it. So these are one of the many inaccuracies that when it comes to his middle name. And when we look at this, it basically just tells you that it basically tells you that the people that were writing about people like Garretson Walter Gibson, that they were basically, let's say, they were reckless. They did not care to carefully get out the correct information about their names. Whatever just came to them, they would write it down. It just shows the reckless behavior and disregard of Europeans when they were taking record or documentation on the people they were writing about, on the people they would present on people the way that they wanted to present them. And that would be the cause of such misinformation and inaccuracy when it comes to people like Garrison Walter Gibson's, be it on their names or ages, something similar.
Yeah, it puts the reader and people who want to know information about him in a difficult spot, because now we have to fight to verify to see, okay, is it Walter, is it Warner, is it Wilmot? Well, we don't. Based on these records, it's kind of getting hard to know which one is the accurate one, because you have them all over the place from different time periods, and so that's why you have this controversy where you don't have that with Joseph Jenkins Roberts or Alfred Francis Russell or William David Coleman or Joseph James Cheeseman. We know their middle names, we know their names, but for some reason for Garrison Gibson, we have this conundrum. And so with the earliest sources that we have come from 1855. So this is when Garrison was in his mid-20s, and this is in the Spirit of the Missions, one of the good sources from that time period. This is 1855, United States by J.L. Powell, and they have him referring to him as Garrison Walter Gibson in the Cape Palmas area. And you see right here, it says on Sunday, January 1st, Mr. Garrison Walter Gibson, Colonial, was admitted to the Order of Deacons. The ordination was held in St. Mark's Church, Cape Palmas.
Okay, so at this point, I we personally decided we concluded that he was being ordained, right? He was
Mhm.
being ordained, and during that time, imagine his age in his 20s, you will definitely know your name. You will know how to spell your name, and so is from this particular publication we assume that and we confirm that he's Walter Gibson because I think he could spell read and write, spell his name correctly.
Mhm.
And besides, let's say for instance, someone wants to honor you. The first thing they do is try to get your name correctly before they publish your name. They will not just guess your name and call you for an honor. So we believe that the church might ask him for a full name prior to ordaining him at the church. I think so.
Yeah, and one of the most important things to remember about that is that this is the earliest document. So this is the first mention of his name. And the first mention of his name, it says that it's Garretson Walter Gibson. So if this is the first recorded mention of his name, or some of the earliest mention of his names, we can probably make the assumption that Garrison Walter Gibson is his actual name.
Mm, yeah.
Can I say something?
Yes, and here is the his name again in the what's called the Liberia. This was a of the Liberian Bulletin. This was a newspaper that came around in the 1890s, 1900s. It was sort of a rebranding of the African Repository. So the African Repository kind of fades out or kind of just goes, kind of shifts from what it was with the African Repository into what we call the Liberia or Liberia Bulletin. So, and here they have his name as Garrison Walter Gibson.
Yeah, and addition and to add up to that, in my opinion, I want to personally believe that his name is definitely Walter because not only could we find the oldest record, which is very credible, but Walter Gibson himself submitted submitted his photograph and his name to ACS for the publication.
Hmm.
So he definitely knew what his middle name was. So I don't think we'll be, is this my opinion. I don't think we'll be able to find any other older record than what we already found. The man said his name
Mm,
was Walter. It's Walter.
correct. Based on those sources and the earliest documented here, we have this again. This is 1900 when he was running in the presidency, and they refer to him as Garrison Walter. This is when he's president. He's running for
Mhm.
presidency. So it's probably Garrison Walter Gibson. You're not going to mess up a president's name or for running a president to that's basically about to come into office. You're not going to mess up that name. That's just not going to
No,
happen. So
not at
No.
all.
it, we can conclude it's Garrison Walter Gibson.
Yeah.
Right.
So now that we have the name right, now we can get into his origin and his genealogy.
Okay, so I should read.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Jacob and Jacob Gibson. Now, Jacob and Rebecca Gibson were free residents of Talbot County, Maryland, where was when they immigrated to Liberia with their children Joseph, Henry, Samuel Gibson, Mary Ann and Louisa, and niece Ellen Gibson. The Gibson family departed from Baltimore on the schooner Harmony on June 28, 1835, and arrived at Cape Palmas, Liberia on August 23, 1835.
The name, just wanted to say the name was Garrison, not Gibson. It's Garrison, not Garrison. I think that's what you kind of said for the Garrisons. I just wanted to make sure that was clarified.
Gibson.
Yeah. So this is the family. So you had his mother and his father. They were free residents at the time, which is is not the norm at this time period. Majority of Black people at this time are still enslaved. So, for him to have parents that were free is definitely, putting him in a unique circumstance. And of course, he immigrates with his brothers and sisters to Cape Palmas in Liberia in 1835.
Yes.
and
Oh, and
let's
there's another important. Oh, no, go ahead,
Go ahead, Papa.
Zota.
Oh,
No, go ahead, Zota. I want to say something. Zota, you good, or you want to have the floor?
yes, I just wanted to mention that when they came in 1835, Garrison was 3 years old.
correct. He
Okay.
wasn't. Correct. He was an infant, and at this time, we have to make note. I want to make this known is that Cape Palmas at this time is not part of Liberia. It's not part of the Commonwealth hasn't formed yet. There's still just a bunch of settlements. So you have, your Mississippi's in Africa that become Sino. You have, your settlements at Edina. You have the situations at Mesurado. And then, of course, you have this is now becoming the Maryland in Africa. So Liberia is still a couple years away from forming the Commonwealth.
Yes. Yes. True. Just go back. Go back to that slide of just 1 minute, as Jabari. So yeah, for Jacob Gibson, uh, there was another record through the efforts of one of the mentors. Um, it's possible that this Jacob Gibson might have fought in the War of 1812, according to another record that showed his name among those enlisted to fight in the war and were liberated. This could have been him, or it could have been another person with his name. Just another interesting fact to mention.
Indeed.
Yes, and someone might ask why, when they came, they did not come straight to Menserado, Cape Menserado, that time. Why they stop at Cape Palmas, like Jabari just mentioned. So you have different colonization societies migrating people from the United States to Africa, and then that was the reason because they came with the Maryland colonization. They were the one that migrated them. That was one of the reasons why they went straight to Cape Palmas.
Indeed. And
Yes.
so we have the list of their names. You see right here. You see it's written in cursive writing. You have Garrison, and then you have the others, like your other Gibsons. So this is what it's showing. You have all the difference. You have Joseph Gibson. It shows you some of the other names like Mary, Rebecca, Jacob. You see all of the names of his former family members, his brothers and sisters, and of course, his parents.
Yes. So okay. So before we get into the content of this letter, we're just gonna talk a little bit about Talbot County. So Garrison, along with his parents and his family, they settled in Talbot County, Maryland, and this county had a mix of recaptured Africans, emancipated Africans, free-born Black Americans, and fugitive slaves, people who fought in the War of 1812. So just wanted to get that out of the way. So in this letter here, basically, Jacob, he wrote a letter to person by the name of John Lathrop and William McKinley, who were advocates for repatriation of Black people to Africa. He requested that they get his biological children free and sent to him, as he could not bear to be separated from them. His children were basically still on one of the many slave plantations back in the States. And not only that, but this actually, when I saw it, it could be possible that he might have been paired with a family by a church, which was very normal at that time. Captured Africans get rescued off the ships. They go under the care of the church. They would be paired with a woman as a wife, and they'd be paired with other children who aren't theirs as their children. So it's possible that he might have been paired with a family by a church, which was normal at the time when recaptured Africans or emancipated Africans were being shipped out to Africa. They would pair them without regard to whether or not they were attracted to each other or not. But yeah, we could head to the
So in
next
18,
slide.
so in
Yeah,
1835, Jacob Gibson wrote this letter, and of course, you see where he is requesting assistance, like Paul said, freeing his children. So of course, we're not
yeah,
going to, necessarily go in depth because there's a lot to it. Basically, what he's saying is, yeah, please free my children if possible.
Yeah.
yeah.
And
So the question. So
and
the
here's
thing
the
is, if you go through the record, it tells you that he came with his children, and when he landed at Cape Palmas, he then wrote the colonization society that they should free his children. The question is, which children? Is it that he already had another family before meeting Rebecca that he's referring to? That's the question we've been asking ourselves. So we don't know the kind of the children he's referring to. Is it that probably at times children will lose their parents and they will be given to other people? Probably it is also possible he might have left them behind and he was requesting for them to come and join his family here.
And what made the letter most strange is that he's not saying you're send the rest of my children. He's saying you're send my children, you're free my children, send them. So is it also saying that the one that he came along with, are they not his children? So it's something that will still where the real story is coming from. Because if he had left some of his children there and came to Liberia, the request would have been, can you please free my other children and send them, or the rest of my children and send them to me? Instead, he's saying, free my children and send them to me. Is it saying that those that he came along with are not his children?
Mm-hmm.
That we don't know.
Sure.
But
Yeah,
one way I look at this is okay. We can say his children on the plantations, they were definitely his biological children. But it's also possible that the children that he came to Liberia with, they could have either been his adopted or his biological children also. But it's just that he wanted to also get his other children that were left behind. It could be any way.
Yes,
we
so
don't
that
So we
know.
that's
say,
We
so we
don't
don't
we
we
know.
don't
don't
know. That's
know.
why I say it could
A
be.
lot of speculation. So here is the letter. The first one that we had, that one was coming from the Maryland State Colonization Report, and so this one is what the
It's,
letter a letter would read. It
it's
would
the
be
same
awesome.
letter.
Yeah, it's the same letter. Yeah,
It's the same letter.
yeah.
It just goes to show us how again the how it just goes to show us how tragic slavery was.
hmm Indeed, and so of course, Garrison and his father, his mother, and some of his siblings, they get to Liberia, and then unfortunately, in 1836, Jacob just dies suddenly. He
Yeah.
dies suddenly, and we
She
know
remarries
that.
within a year.
Yeah, he dies within a year. And we know that because on January 19th, 1837, Rebecca is married to a man by the name of William Delaney, or it's another way spelled Delaney, a carpenter with a young son also named William. And so William Delaney does not appear in the record after 1838. And by 1840, Rebecca is listed in the census as a widow again. So right here, it shows marriages at Cape Palmas, and then it says on January 19th, 1837, you have Reverend J.L. Wilson, who's marrying William Delaney to Miss R. Gibson.
Sure.
So we
Yeah,
see, just briefly that within a span of just 4 years, she loses two husbands, and she's a widow again by 1840.
yeah, and another important thing to note is immediately within a year she just had to marry, which led me to believe that these people they were basically they were there was no form of attraction, or even if there was a form of little attraction, her remarrying within a year, it just shows you that within that time period, women they had to be they needed to have a patriarch, they needed to have a patriarch within their lives to be able to provide for them at that time, because women in that time period wouldn't be able to get certain,
They had limited autonomy. They had limited autonomy.
yeah, certain autonomy. That's the word I'm looking for.
They didn't have the
Okay.
economic and social autonomy to be
Yes.
independent. They oftentimes you had to be married, and so marriage was a big factor. So it doesn't surprise us that Rebecca quickly marries uh,
Yeah.
after Jacob dies when she gets to Cape Palmas. And we have the 1840 census right here, which again shows Rebecca as a widow.
1800s was definitely real.
Yeah.
Yeah. So over here we have. So this is a portrait of. First, we have Garretson W. Gibson in the lower left, and the man standing behind him in the center, that is Arthur Barclay, who would succeed him as president of Liberia. Then to Barclay's left, we have H.W. Grimes, and then to the lower right, we have H.A. Williams, and to the upper far right, we have H.L. Moore.
Yes, and those were the men that would go on to make up uh, Gibson's cabinet. Before we get
Yeah.
into that, I just want to just give a shout out to Say. She said, "Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. Thank you for tuning in, Say. It's great to hear back from you again." And as she mentioned, we were discussing women during this time period. They didn't have much rights, and women were often seen as the property of men. So, of course, being a single woman by yourself was obviously not going to get you very far. So, you had to get married. So, wanted to mention those two comments before we get into the career of Garrison Walter Gibson. So,
So yeah, you want to come in or
yeah, so
okay? Oh,
this right
okay.
here, yeah, this right here is just showing the Protestant Episcopal Mission Cape Palmas in West Africa in the 1850s, and this was done by woodcut prints and photographs, Division Library of Congress. So this is just showing Cape Palmas at this time in the 1850s.
Yeah.
Yeah, before you pass by, I just want to mention how beautiful and how well laid out the place is. Imagine during that time period, if you looking at the view of Cape Palmas that time. Though I haven't been there recently, but it's just so unique and nice. Thank you for zooming. Chibai. Yeah.
hmm it's
Mhm.
pretty. It's a pretty dope place, especially like you said in the 1850s. Of course, they're a rather small community, but it's great to see those Episcopal missions in the 1850s. It's really good to have sort of that, retro
Yeah.
the retrospection and being able to look back. So
Yep, indeed. But now that we're talking about the 1850s, let's dive into his background and career. So Gibson lived with his brother Joseph and later Henry in 1852. Studied at the mission school in Cape Palmas and yeah, studied under Dr. George A. Perkins. Then, under Reverend John Payne's sponsorship, he furthered his studies in the United States and returned to Liberia after 2 years, where he was ordained as a preacher and described as a man of scholarly achievement. If you just go back 2 slides, please. Yeah, I think the Liberia College was shown after this. Liberia
no,
College.
so yeah,
Okay,
Yes, I
it's
have.
before that one, right?
yeah. So this one is talking about Garrison's upbringing. So we know
Okay,
that he
okay.
was reported living with his mother on the 1840-1843 census. Then, following his mother's death in 1847, Henry and Louisa, Henry and Louisa lived with their eldest brother Joseph and family per the 1848 and 1849 census. Then he attends the Protestant Episcopal mission schools at Cape Palmas, the ones that we showed y'all previously. And that's where he enjoyed the sponsorship, like you said, of Dr. George A. Perkins, missionary physician with Salem, Massachusetts, and the Reverend after Bishop Payne. And so
Yes.
this is a picture of Liberia College that shows, people there, and of course, people getting their education there.
So before you
And he
pass
would
this
later,
slide, that someone please mention if this building is still at your campus. Yes,
Yes,
I want to know.
I think they call it the AB building. I think it's still at the campus. Yeah, if I can still remember it well.
it's called the what?
And they call it the AB building. I think it's still on the campus.
The,
I want our
the AV
viewers
building.
to.
Oh,
Is it still in
is
the
the
same
place still
structure?
there? I don't know. I would have to go check, but I don't know. I don't know where it's at.
So we are leaving
Um,
it up to our viewers to tell us if this building, if they can actually recognize this building at your campus.
That is a good
so
question. We can't try and get a picture. Maybe we need a modern picture. But yeah. Um. So. So basically, this is the Trinity Church of Monrovia in 1863. Gibson. He becomes director of the Trinity Episcopal Church in Monrovia. But before we go forward to that, after being ordained as a preacher, he was married. He married a woman by the name of Pauline Lenora Hicks. And according to census records, I don't know if Jabari has the census records on the slides. According to census records from an Episcopal church, she was of similar age to Gibson. Her parents were
Sure.
Sophia and yeah.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Her parents were Sophia and M.M. Hicks, and her sibling was Chauncey Hicks. In Liberian history, women are mentioned but not deeply explored as compared to their male counterparts. So I just felt the need to make mention of that.
okay.
Yeah.
Um,
But
yeah. So in 1850, he went to the United States of America to study theology under the private sponsorship of the Reverend H.V.D. Jones, at that time rector of Christ Church. He returned to Liberia, was ordained and appointed assistant minister to St. Mark's Church and principal of the Mount Vaughn High School. And then when Dr. Carmel resigned the rectorship of Trinity Church in Monrovia, Gibson was called to the post, which he occupied until 1883, so almost 30 years.
yeah, so he served as chaplain of the Senate. He was commissioner of education under Presidents Roy, Payne, and Johnson's administration. He was Secretary of State of Liberia for 15 years under the administrations of Presidents Gardner, Cheeseman, and Coleman. He was professor of moral philosophy and was elected president of Liberia College. While serving as Secretary of State in the 1900s, he was inaugurated to fill the unexpired term of President Coleman and was re-elected to presidency in 1902.
Indeed. So you see, he has a well-established career being in government, and he worked his way up through the ranks.
Yeah.
So now it culminates with him being president, and now we're going into his presidency.
Yeah.
And you see right there's a gunboat. So there were some things that was going on.
You want to talk about the gunboat a little bit, or should we just keep on?
Basically, what was going on is obviously there was tensions brewing in the near Cape Palmas, where he's from. Of course, you had conflicts going on with the Grebo and different Grebo clans and groups going on that eventually led to situations where you needed a schooner and all that to sort of deter. You also have encroachment that's going on in 1892 with the Kavala being taken from Liberia. So a lot's going on. So a lot is going on at this time. So, and speaking of 1892, here is an excerpt that is referring to what is going on, and this is written by Secretary of State Garretson W. Gibson.
Yeah. During Cheeseman's administration. It's during Cheeseman's administration, right?
Yeah, well, this is I think this is Cheeseman, because I think Johnson has wrapped up his, so I think this is definitely Cheeseman's.
Yeah, it is.
It says during Chisholm administration when he was
Secretary of
down
State.
Secretary of State but now appointed as president. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this
yeah,
one is enclosure number one, and it's from the Executive Mansion, Department of State, Monrovia, Liberia, July 8th, 1892.
yeah,
And it reads, Sir, I have the honor, by the direction of the President, to ask you to communicate with the government of His Majesty, the King of the Belgians, and assure him that the government of the Republic of Liberia adheres to the General Act of the Brussels Conference relative to the African slave trade, signed at Brussels July 2nd, 1890, in conformity to Article 98 of said act. This adhesion to be subject to the ratification of the Senate, which meets in December next. And then, of course, I have, and etc. G.W. Gibson, Secretary of State.
Yes.
So this is just one of the many documents and some of the many agreements that he has while he is Secretary of State.
yeah. So so basically this is an excerpt from the Christian Advocate 1900. It basically talks about the two naval schooners purchased by Cheeseman during his administrations. They were not really as strong and powerful compared to British or American Navy vessels, but they were something. And these schooners were used to repel back insurgents that were causing conflicts and getting closer within Liberia's borders. So Cheeseman purchased both of these ships, and he dealt a huge blow to the insurgents that tried to encroach onto Liberia's territory, which was a very powerful thing, and it showed not only the resilience, but it also showed that how this would later change or shift with Garrison's presidency coming in. But to stick to this one, the Liberian Republic had a navy consisting of two vessels: the Rocktown, a steel gunboat rigged as a fore and aft schooner, having one smokestack. She was 100 feet long, had 20 feet beam, was said to be able to steam 12 knots, and mounted one 6-pounder quick firing gun and three machine guns. And the Goronoma, a steel gunboat, 98 inches long, with a displacement of 150 tons and an estimated speed of 12 knots. Her armament consisting of one 6-pounder quick firing gun, one 3-pounder quick firer, and two brass saluting guns. The Goronoma was built at Belfast in 1892, and the Rocktown was launched at Rotterdam in 1894. These vessels were cost about 140,000, have been destroyed. The Rocktown having been sunk in the harbor of Monrovia on March 10, while the Goronoma was capsized in the St. Paul River, and she was going to be overhauled. So Liberia did not have any military; they only had a small militia, and Cheeseman bought two navy schooners just to add up to what little they had left. They were not a powerful country, but as little as they were, they had that mentality of, hey, we might not be powerful, but we're not going down without a fight.
But but this
This was the yeah.
this was even powerful because if you exclude the European power, Liberia was powerful because during this time having two guns boat was not something very small. Though we are looking at it small in terms of comparing with maybe the Britain, the France, and the United States, but this was great because they could use it to protect their territory.
Sure.
At least, yeah,
Remember, they didn't
at
have much
least.
military, but that gunboat could show the fear.
So when there's a conflict
Hmm.
and then you try to resolve the conflict, no way, and one of the gunboats appear, trust me, all arms down. So it was better
Exactly
back
so.
then. Yeah.
Yeah, and I reading that something I'm still thinking about. It said that the gunboats were destroyed prior to saying
Yeah,
one got sunk and the other one, capsized, but yet it's saying it was destroyed. So I'm something different to that.
and even though there's no physical or documented evidence to show who did it, we know who did it because if we look at the context, we know that the
Yeah.
British had been long trying to encroach on Liberian territory.
Indeed. Not both the British and the French, but it's leaning more towards the British.
Mostly the British, because it was, yeah.
So
So yeah,
this is the former president that would take. That was just the former president, William David Coleman, that Gibson is going to succeed. And this is just, the Pan African Congress, one of the very first of its kind, Westminster Town Hall, the 23rd, 24th, and 25th of July, 1900. And it just says that this conference is organized by a committee of the African Association for the discussion of the native races question and will be attended and addressed by those of African descent from all parts of the British Empire, the United States of America, Abyssinia, Liberia, Haiti, etc. You are cordially and earnestly invited to attend conferences morning, and then it says 10:30, and then evening, and then it says the Honorable H.S. Williams. So that's what this is. It's just referring to William David Coleman, the former president of Liberia, the president that precedes Gibson, and then the Pan African Congress.
yes. So yeah, the Pan African Conference was held at Westminster Town Hall, not far from the British Parliament, in July 1900. It discussed on slavery, colonialism, racism, all forms of oppression against Africa and African people worldwide. Frederick Eugene Rich Lou Johnson, grandson of, here it says Hillary Johnson, but it's actually Elijah Johnson. This is just a
Yeah.
typo error. So for the audience, please disregard this. Hillary Johnson was the son of Frederick Eugene Richelieu Johnson, but Elijah Johnson was the grandfather of Frederick Eugene Richelieu Johnson. So just want to make it clear for the
Yeah,
audience out there to avoid the confusion.
Frederick is the son of Hillary. Hillary's the father. Elijah is the grandfather of Frederick.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
And,
Elijah Johnson is, yeah.
and I also want to make note that another Liberian attends the Pan African Congress. It was the former First Lady, Jane Wayne Roberts. So I want to also add
Yes.
that. So there were many
Yes,
Liberians who attended
yes.
the Pan African Congress.
Yes, thank you. So yeah. So yeah, this is a picture of Gibson standing right there. His top white hat, surrounded by a group of militiamen.
Can we go back to that slide, please? Yeah.
This
So
slide.
somewhere down there, it said Frederick Eugene Richelieu Johnson delivered a fiery speech about economic liberty and self-governance. This is a black man coming from Liberia and going to that conference and speaking about self-governance and liberty. I think this is inspiring at that time to have that courage to appear and speak in this tone. It's something that I think we need to look at very carefully.
Yeah, it's powerful. He's carrying the sentiment of his grandfather Elijah Johnson.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Especially at a time when Africa has pretty much been carved up by this time.
Yes.
Yeah, because this happened after the Berlin Conference. Africa already been partitioned and colonialism is at the higher peak. And you are going there talking about let African people have self-governance and liberty. It takes a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, we've already discussed this picture. Once again, this is Gibson standing right there in the top white hat with his cane, surrounded by his militiamen.
Indeed.
This is the year
And this is
1900, right?
Yeah, this is like it's also in Monrovia. So yes.
Yeah.
So
you want me to read?
yeah, this is from on behalf. This is to the Senate and House of Representatives from Garretson Walter Gibson.
Yeah, it's his presidential speech. It's a speech he gives to the House. So it reads, in obedience to your call and according to the law governing the case, I have appeared before you and have taken the oath prescribed by the Constitution for one about to enter upon the duties of the Chief Magistrate of the Republic. The resignation of President Coleman and the death of the late Vice President Ross renders it necessary for the Secretary of State to discharge the functions of the presidency until the vacancy be filled by a new election. The position so suddenly and unexpectedly forced upon me establishes the official relations between us quite different from those which existed for the protracted period during which I have been in the service of the government in another capacity. I trust, however, that the same harmony and good understanding which have marked our intercourse heretofore will continue during the short period I may occupy the post. He's basically saying that he's going to give it his best as president for the Republic of Liberia, but that really does not go smooth
He gave his
during
voice.
his presidential term.
Yeah, and just to add to that, he's giving this speech because he's been in government for quite a long time, and he knows exactly what to say and where to say it. And then besides that, earlier on when we were trying to confirm the middle name difference, I think here is a confirmation. He his name Garretson W Gibson.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that leads us into, of course, the executive mansion. And this is just, a picture, I think, of the executive mansion. And I don't think it's Broad Street. I think it's Aspen
This
Street,
was
but I'm
this
not.
was on Aspen Street at the time. Yeah, Aspen
Aspen
Street at the
Street.
time.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Like it had to either be Broad or Aspen Street. So, yeah, looks pretty
See, the
nice.
ground is
I
all
like,
grassy.
yeah, I love that picture so much. Looks so cool.
And for an old picture, it's clean. Was it restored or something?
It was restored, but I think it was in the 20s that happened. I think that's when it
Okay,
was.
it looks very clean. All right. All right. All right. So for this slide, we're just going to have to really take our time here. So first, we'll read this and then we'll give a little bit more context. So at this time now, uh, after the scramble of Africa, you have European imperialists. They have already carved up Africa and they have already set a foothold over different African territories as their colonies. And in this case, you have Leopold, who takes over Belgian Congo or Congo as his personal property. And in this Congo, you see him and his criminal allies. They commit acts of genocide against the people of Congo. In this picture right here, you can see a Congolese man. He's looking at the hands and feet of his child that were brutally severed or cut off. Reason why it served as punishment because he failed to make the daily rubber quota. I just want the audience to just look at this and understand the situation that Liberia was in at this time period. Liberia was not only attacked from all sides by the British and French enforcers, but you had atrocities not only happening in places like Congo, but places like what is now called Namibia, which was called German Southwest Africa, where Germans are slaughtering Herero and San ethnic clans. You have the same thing going. You have the same issues going on in South Africa, Ethiopia, other African territories that have now become colonies of European imperialism.
Ethiopia is not a colony
And
yet. It's not a colony.
oh, okay, sorry, main error. Thanks for the correction. But
And this also speak
yeah,
to the problem that when Liberian people talking about it was better would be colonized. You don't even know what you're talking about. People who were colonized
yes,
know where they passed and what they passed through to get to the place. So people fought for this country and you got a better freedom country. As long you hear you're talking about it was good, we will be alright. But yeah, it was never gonna be alright. Imagine that man, they
this
cut
was
off the
basic.
hand and
Yeah,
the feet of your child right before you. only because you didn't perform or you didn't accumulate a rubber cup just per day. And that man never recover from that thing until he died.
And
Yes,
doing
of
this
course.
particular,
This
imagine
was the
this kind of
cost of
situation.
colonization.
Yeah,
This kind
the
of
thing.
situation is ongoing, and you have President Garretson Gibson sending out his condolence to King Leopold for the dismiss of his wife and all of that in this kind
I
of
mean, I,
situation.
I I see it. I see what Garrison does as just a formality in this particular situation. As you guys know, there's nothing to celebrate about King Leopold, and it's important that we make that very clear. This man was I'm not mincing words. This man was a savage. Okay, this man, like
Savage.
you said, cut off
Yeah.
people's limbs. They worked people to death. This man made it his personal property. And it was the likes of African Americans like Booker T. Washington that exposed King Leopold and exposed him so much that it eventually caused him to have to no longer govern the territory. It was no longer his personal property after these atrocities had come out. And I also want to make it known to everybody, the viewers and those who are watching later on, that Frederick Starr, the person who wrote the book in 1913, was one of the main proponents of people who were sanitizing what King Leopold was doing, which is why we always say to give Frederick Starr's words grains of salt, because this man was the man that was whitewashing King Leopold's terror in the Congo.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's reported that the man who did this went insane and was not good afterwards. So, just to understand the magnitude.
Yeah. So I'll just read this, then we give a context on this slide. So I'm glad to be able to inform you that the protocol which was laid before you at the last session, embodying articles of agreement between His Britannic Majesty's government and Liberia facilitating trading intercourse on the part of British subjects and Liberian citizens on our northwestern frontier, has been accepted by both governments. Arrangements have also been made for a joint commission to demarcate the boundary line between Sierra Leone and Liberia, which work we hope to begin early next year. So if you noticed in the excerpt written, you can see where it's underlined British subjects and Liberian citizens. Garrison Walter knew how people that were colonized by said British or treated. They did not have the privilege of citizens, but rather were being treated like subjects in a sense that they would be taken to do forced labor without pay. You had the British in Sierra Leone that were imposing hard taxes on kings of the land, capturing people to do forced labor. And not only that, but you would have these kings of the land being captured and exiled to the Gold Coast. Once again, Gibson knew that the British did not treat their subjects with any form of respect or privilege. And in the lower right of this post, you will see there's a man by the name of General Babura, who was a Tammany man. So General Babura of Sierra Leone was fighting the British and trying to resist their wicked tactics, such as forced labors, amongst other things. And with everything that was going on, you would see these British subjects running to Liberia for refuge. This would further infuriate the British even more and lead them to find ways to take Liberia forcefully in order to subject every African person under their savage and wicked rule. We saw this with the takings of the Galenas territory during Anthony Gardner's administration. Liberia was this is why I say Liberia was really attacked from all sides.
Liberia lost about 30% of its territory during this time period.
30% of its
Abortion,
territory.
so we remember, yeah, a third of its territory. So you mentioned the Galenas territory. The Kavala River was taken by the French, and much of the land that we consider that was Musardu, all that territory was taken. That used to be part of Liberia. Now it's no longer part of Liberia. All of those places that encompass the rivers were taken from Liberia. It's why the head of the river is in Guinea and not in Liberia because the French seized it. So it's important that we understand that. And of course, British subjects and Liberian citizens have equal rights and protections under the law. Subjects don't. Subjects are under the control of the people that are ruling them.
And just to clarify, in the lower part of the letter, it says the purpose of the letter was to do demarcation between Liberia and Sierra Leone, in the following year. So it was the Garretson W Gibson president was informing the British king that the demarcation should be done early next year, because if not, the guy will still be encroaching on Liberia's territory. So let's divide it, please. Take what you can take and let's have what we can have.
Mhm. Formal demarcation.
So in this section, the British were basically allowing them to navigate the Mano River, even though Liberia, like they sunk both of their ships. They had no ships, but they said they were allowed to navigate the river, even though they sunk Liberia's ships.
Yep. So Liberia
So,
gets the right to navigate a river. London,
mhm.
October the 12th. The Liberian officials who arrived in England early in August to obtain from Great Britain the right to navigate the Mano River has been successful, despite the fact that Great Britain was unwilling at first to grant the request of the Republic. In addition to this envoy discussed with the Colonial Office a proposition to strengthen Liberia's international status. This is from the New York Journal, October 13th, 1901.
Yeah, and Jabari.
Yes.
Yeah, we mentioned to the audience that we're gonna give them an insight on how Gibson's presidency wasn't so smooth and it was outright terrible. Should we just talk about that a little bit also?
We'll get there later. We're not there yet.
All right.
Right. We're talking about his foreign policy. And of course, this is just referring back to his president, some of the things that he's had. So now we're going to talk about this letter from Liberia Monrovia, May 13th, 1901. And this is talking about him being elected into office.
Yeah, you want me to read it?
Go ahead.
All right. Dear Sir, Mr. J. Ormond Wilson, dear Sir, the election is over, and from unofficial returns as far as heard from, it appears that the Honorable G.W. Gibson is elected president, and the Honorable J.D. Somerville of Bassa County, vice president by large majorities. In Maryland and Bassa counties, the entire vote cast was cast for them, except 2 votes in Bassa. Mr. Coleman received an exceedingly small vote in this Montserrado County. In Monrovia, not 1 vote was cast for him. I'm well pleased with this almost one-sided vote. It shows that the masses of our people do not favor cruel treatment of the natives. This is as it should be. In olden times, it was quite often necessary to fight them, for they, being misled by the slave traders, looked upon the newcomers as their enemies, come here for the purpose of stopping them from making their money. But the slave trade has ceased to be possible. A better understanding had obtained. The natives had been taught themselves Liberian, and so the old policy of looking upon them as aliens and treating them as such was out of date. It is a bad policy here for our people to set one tribe of natives at war with another. Aside from the unchristian and immoral aspect of the case, it has the effect of stopping trade. Immense quantities of palm oil and palm kernels, piassava, I think they're meaning to say cassava, I could be wrong, dye woods, rubber, etc., are brought to markets by the natives. These articles of trade help largely to load the English and German steamers that call now almost daily at our ports. So for the audience, in this excerpt where it talks about where it says the cruel treatment of the natives, I just want to personally make it clear for the audience that at this time during William D. Coleman's presidency, you had conflicts that were taking place in the northern and central province, and these conflicts were very much not only heated, but they were at the advantage of the British and the French. The British and the French would use or exacerbate these conflicts for them to gain foothold over more territories. And William Coleman did what any other leader would do to protect the sovereignty of their nation, because these conflicts were crossing into were getting literally getting into getting on Liberia's front doorsteps. So William D. Coleman used brutal force to quell these conflicts if peaceful negotiations did not work. When he did this, he did not really gain support from his cabinet, and because of this, they get him to resign. They pressure him to resign. And during the slave trade they were okay with fighting against Africans that were engaging in the slave trade. But now that the slave trade was diminishing, even though these heated conflicts were going on, you have people in the cabinet that saw that there was no need to engage in further conflicts with these in indigenous Africans. But Coleman saw something bigger than that. He saw that Liberia was at risk, and he understood that the British, the French were using these conflicts to their advantage to gain more territory. So I just
Yeah,
want to make
and
that clear for the audience.
it was not just only Coleman. So it happened during so many presidents' administration.
Yeah.
So it will actually be the case where if you try to negotiate and the kings don't want to negotiate, you have to use force in order to get your territory, or else we should remember, like my colleague just said, they will incite the people, telling them that uh, don't listen to the Liberian government. Remember, this place is your land. If you allow them to take it, they will be the one governing you. You will not govern yourself. But if you fight for this land, you get this land, you're going to govern yourself. Obviously, you won't govern yourself. At the end of the day, they will
Mm,
be like other countries that were colonized today. They seize your land and then you work, you are subject to them. So it was not just only during David Coleman time, it was also during other administration that it happened. But it's just that it happened. And the good thing about him is that because of the noise too much, he had to resign. He resigned. They took the person they actually thought maybe they could control or they had favor in, which was G.W. Gibson. And actually, all of these things actually came from his own administration, with the people working in his administration. They were not on his side.
Yeah, so they elected G.W. Gibson. They thought G.W. Gibson was going to be their guy, and G.W. Gibson ended up not, doing too well. He did win in 1901, but then he loses in the next election. He only serves from 1900 to 1904. So, he only really serves maybe one or two terms. I think it's probably just one term, but yeah, he doesn't leave that lasting legacy. And it's really Barclay that comes in that we're going to talk about next, that really picks up the pieces and really sort of does it. So Gibson has a lot going on during this presidency, but he's not the I would say the top tier compared to the Barclays and that come after, and the Howards and all that. He's in there, but his presidency is not like a aha moment. So after his presidency, he is genuinely described as being elderly and respected, according to Starr. Again, I know my graphs are stars. Gibson was still involved in the affairs of the nation after his presidency. He was part of the delegation to the U.S. in 1908, along with Vice President J.J. Dosen, the first indigenous person on the Supreme Court, Charles B. Dunbar, Charles R. Branch, and T.G.R. Faulkner from North Carolina. And, they stopped in Berlin on their way to Washington and were well received with distinguished courteousness. The delegation met with Roosevelt, President Theodore Roosevelt, not Franklin D. Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, and Secretary Taft on requesting aid for Liberia. And then, of course, upon return, to Liberia. President Barclay held a reception in their honor on August 18th, 1909. And then the following year, Gibson is going to die in Monrovia in 1910.
Yeah. So Gibson passes away 6th of April, 1910. And what is his legacy as the president of Liberia? Basically, his presidency oversaw numerous ceding of territory to external forces, which hindered Liberia's economic self sufficiency. This act would later be replicated by future presidents Charles D.B. King and William V.S. Tubman. During
Yeah, so
his presidency involved numerous proposals to grant concessions to lots of companies to come in to exploit Liberia's mineral resources. With one of them being particularly very dangerous for Liberia, but didn't happen. And this was the concession to the West African Gold Concession, which was a British company. They wanted rights to exploit Liberia's mineral resources. They were to gain control and extract any amount of resources they wanted to. And in turn, the legislature would have gotten 1,500 British pounds in return for those concessions. Also, the lease. Yeah. Oh, you want to say something?
So it's 1005 bribe. They bribed them.
Yeah, 1,500 British pounds in return for the concessions. And also, this lease concession would grant them the right to establish their own bank, police, and years of use. And furthermore, they unsuccessfully tried increasing foreign trade and almost led Liberia to the brink of bankruptcy. So, yeah, Gibson's policies they would share similarities in decades to come with the likes of Charles D.B. King and William V.S. Tubman.
yeah, so
So
yeah, so Gibson again is not really.
He's a
He's not. There's no
vintage.
aha moment with him. He's not like one of those remarkable presidents like that. I'm just gonna put it like that. I mean, it was really Barclay and Howard that had to come in and pick up the pieces. That's why he ain't well known. Like even compared to Coleman or Cheeseman, he's just there in my opinion. And I know that kind of sounds cool, but
Hmm.
that's just the way to sum it up. Eventually, of course, with his death, they do a memorial to remember him, and they say, of the Reverend D.W. Gibson, the Reverend Garretson W. Gibson, D.D. for many years, a deacon, years a missionary and sometimes president of the Republic of Liberia, died at Monrovia, Liberia on April 26th in the 78th year of his age. He was ordained deacon in 1854 and priest in 1855 by Bishop Payne and had for a long time held the professorship of mental and moral philosophy in Liberia College, Monrovia.
and I think Gibson was just a bad person because he's still a law in government. He served as Secretary of State, Commissioner for Education. We assume that you should understand exactly what Liberia stands for at that time. You become president, you change everything around, trying to do something that is going against the country. After you serve all that years in government, knowing exactly what the country meant, you're just a bad guy.
Um,
So the Reverend Chancellor does not replicate
I,
his attitude as president. Yeah, you can call
I
you Resco.
personally wouldn't.
I would say, I would say that had a different approach because it's kind of like Charles D.B. King. I don't like his approach, but in a certain way, it's kind of like when you stuck between a rock and it's like a hard, like it's like one of those people you're stuck in those places. You know, what options do you really have? Like what? Yeah, when you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, what do you do? Like, it's one of those difficult situations. I wish Gibson was more like Barclay, but Gibson has his own personality, and he thought he was doing what was best. Some of that today we would see that as selling outs or not doing what's best. So,
Yeah.
and that's one of the things we're trying to teach you guys and everybody who's watching this and who's going to watch this afterwards is that presidents are complex. History is complex. It's hard. Some of our presidents were warriors. They were going hard in the paint. They was going all in. Some wanted to avoid it at all means possible and was trying to run around circles to prevent that from happening. So, one thing you can learn about from Gibson is, hey, maybe don't take the easy way out and try to run around in circles to avoid it. But, hey, we'll never know what was going through the mind of Gibson. Can't speak to him, but based on his actions, we can kind of get a gist.
We don't know what the result would have been if he had continued to run around the circle for another 2 terms. It would have been maybe something different. I don't know.
Indeed. That's the fun thing about history, y'all. That's the fun thing about history. So, with that being said, y'all, if there's any more questions for those who are watching, let us know. This wraps up the presidency of Garretson Walter Gibson, our 14th president. Next week, we're going to be going on the 15th president, Arthur Barclay, one of the greats of Liberian history. So we're going to learn about him. That's going to be a fun one. I know that's going to be fun for y'all. So get ready for that one next Saturday. Make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for the BAIO African channel. Make sure to donate to the Liberian Leadership Academy. It is underneath. It's also going to be in the description. More people that sign up, the more that we can do and the more that we can get this information out to the people in Liberia. So with that, it looks like there's not any additional questions or comments. And with that, I'm going to let our facilitators. Thank you guys for coming on. Thank you guys for partaking in this. And we will be seeing y'all next week. So this wraps up the presidential series, the presidents today. And I'll see y'all in the next video.
Thank you.
Yes. It's an honor to be here. See you next.
It's great to be here. We'll see you again.